Ringed by rugged mountains, the quiet settlement of Trame wakes to another peaceful morning as cattle graze in the fields and villagers wash laundry along the river. Soil flies with every swing of a hoe as men cart heavy stones and pry stubborn tree stumps from the clearing. At 10 years old, Luca knows this grueling routine by heart, swinging his farming tool day after day under the sun. A modern tractor would make clearing these fields effortless, a thought natural to someone reborn from another world. Memories of his past life remain hazy, yet he clearly recalls modern conveniences that simply do not exist here. Replacing engines and electricity, mystical energy fills the air as Luca twirls a ribbon of pure water over his fingertip. This land mirrors the fantasy games from his past life, complete with dragons and mages, as Luca shapes the water into a droplet and drinks it. Channeling mana allows nearly every villager to cast basic household magic, commanding fire, water, earth, and wind. A shimmering aura envelops Luca like a protective barrier, renewing his drive to push through the day's hard labor. Body enhancement spells reinforce physical strength, keeping Luca and the surrounding laborers tireless as carts roll past. Sunset paints the distant peaks as livestock heads back to pens and villagers wrap up their evening chores. Inconveniences aside, these vast, tilled fields and mountain views make Trame a serene, welcoming home. Edward calls across the clearing that work is done, prompting Luca to shoulder his hoe and turn toward his father. Praising Luca's steady growth, Edward brushes off his own fatigue, eager to head home and draw a warm bath with magic. Neighboring farmers wave farewell from the communal plots as father and son share a warm smile on the walk home. Cheerful villagers greet them along the path, offering freshly prepared food to add to their evening basket. Little Arcia dashes to the front door shouting cheerful greetings as Sonia warmly welcomes Edward and Luca back home. Eager to share a bath, Arcia asks her brother for hot water, and Luca happily agrees before Sonia can worry about his fatigue. Sonia teases that the whole family relies on Luca's bathtub now, though Arcia flatly refuses Edward's clumsy scrubbing. Most villagers only wipe down with damp towels, but Luca channels mana and clear mental imagery to fill their tub for Arcia. Cherishing memories of proper baths from his past life, Luca refused to settle for basic wipe-downs. Driven by modern habits, Luca carved a stone bathroom straight out of the pantry using earth magic, stunning his parents. That impulsive creation became a household favorite, and Arcia excitedly asks Luca to start his usual water magic performance. Dividing the liquid into precise droplets, Luca animates a liquid figure to recount the legend of Sekitaro born beneath the sacred tree of Syra. Arcia beams with wonder as fluid beasts and shimmering figures float through the steam around her. Drawing from folklore of his former life in Japan, Luca stages an enchanting water theater for his little sister. Entertaining Arcia inspired this technique, yet shaping and animating liquid demands relentless precision. Sustaining such microcontrol requires intense focus, built through daily mana training since the day he awoke in this world. An adult consciousness gave infant Luca remarkable clarity, even if memories of his previous demise remained blocked. Static clouded his past, leaving behind only one haunting certainty. A terrible tragedy had ended his first life. Blessed with devoted parents, baby Luca grew up in warmth as Sonia told him off and Edward cast gentle wind magic to dry his skin. Nursing as a baby opened his senses, allowing Luca to taste the faint trace of mana within Sonia's milk. Relentless baby experiments expanded his internal mana pool until one reckless push drained his reserves to zero. Total mana depletion expanded his perception across the surrounding atmosphere, making his consciousness feel weightless. Awakening to see Sonia and Edward weeping in relief, Luca realized his reckless mana drain had nearly killed him. Only the village priest's timely intervention stabilized the infant, engraving his parents' desperate relief into Luca's memory forever. That crisis revealed the fundamental rule of this world. Conjuring external spells drains the caster's internal mana reserves. He soon learned to absorb ambient energy directly from soil, water, and wind, refining it into potent internal power. Reborn into a realm of spells, Luca vowed to master mana for a comfortable life, as Arcia marvels at his dancing water sculptures. Daily playtime doubles as secret mana training until Sonia swings the bathroom door open to announce dinner. Sonia sets down a hearty feast as Luca uses microcurrents to stir their drinks, gathering around for Edward's stories. Edward reminds his son that mana is a precious life force, checking on Luca's health to ensure he is not overexerting himself. When Luca asks if he broke any rules, Edward simply breaks into a warm, proud smile. Complimenting his wife's cooking, Edward prompts Arcia to giggle that mom makes far better food than dad ever could. Night settles over his modest bedroom as Luca lies in bed, asking for nothing more than this simple, peaceful life. Arcia sleeps clutching her plush rabbit as Edward and Sonia share a quiet drink, solidifying Luca's wish to protect their happy home. Morning sun crests the peaks as sleepy Arcia greets her parents, immediately asking where her big brother ran off to. Sonia explains that Luca is already training in the fields, prompting Edward to step outside and check on his son's progress. Out in the dirt clearing, Luca extends his hands to reshape loose soil, aiming to craft earth golems just like his water puppets. Segmented soil locks into a solid earthen warrior under his mana, snapping into a ready combat stance at Luca's command. Edward blinks in confusion, asking if this is just playtime, but Luca names his dirt wireframe Bon and commands it to till. Bon drives the hoe into the soil as Luca promises faster harvests, leaving Edward stunned by his son's immense magical scale. The earth doll collapses into dust, but Luca stays confident even as Edward warns him that gawking villagers will soon gather. Rural life offers plenty of room to experiment, so Luca reconstructs Bon from the dirt as Edward steps away to greet calling neighbors. Trame is an isolated mountain settlement of 200 souls, sustained by the men laboring tirelessly across its terraced fields. Established under Christophel Callisto, this outpost exists solely to cultivate the herb of magical power for rare medicines. Back before the village homes, the dirt golem grips its hoe, crafted by Luca to ease the heavy labor of the farmers. A wandering chicken watches Bon strike the soil, faithfully obeying Luca's intent to simplify field chores. Turning to his childhood friend, Luca asks Linnell for her thoughts, and Toshton's granddaughter gasps in pure admiration. Linnell compares the earth construct to how Luca plays with Arcia, but the puppet breaks apart before he can defend his training. When Linnell asks to see his water figures, Luca casually invites her to share the bath next time, sending her imagination into overdrive. Screaming his name, Linnell covers her crimson face and flees, leaving Luca scratching his cheek over her bizarre reaction. Edward bellows a cheerful greeting as they step inside, met by Sonia's warm smile, and Arcia pulling Luca straight toward the tub. Denied a bath by Arcia, Edward sulks over his daughter favoring Luca, right until her piercing wails echo from the water. Flailing her tiny arms, Arcia complains the new water figure is too stiff and hideous to squish, prompting an apologetic bow from Luca. Remolding the water into a cute blob brings back Arcia's smile, proving to Luca that his training made the previous construct too humanoid. Alongside Arcia's soft toy, Luca shapes a heavily muscled figure, wondering why realistic anatomy gets labeled so repulsive. Dividing the puppet into distinct articulation points multiplies complexity, driving Luca to master joint synchronization. Linking all nodes into a unified mechanical core, Luca perfects the human shape, reassuring Arcia as she questions his intense focus. Smooth coordination unlocks instant responsiveness, letting Luca direct every nimble movement with effortless mental focus. Pouting defiantly, Arcia insists. Her round pet is cuter than the muscular miniature Luca made staring across the tub. Spellcraft questions meant for the priest fill Luca's mind as Sonia calls both children out of the water. Edward checks his son's stamina, astounded that Luca cast earth and water spells all day without draining his mana dry. Hearing about the field golems, Sonia praises Luca's noble drive to help the village, though motherly worry softens her voice. Luca laughs off their anxiety, carelessly assuring them he will not perish like he nearly did during his frail infancy. Arcia bursts into tears. Sonia scrambles to soothe her, and Edward roars in anger as Luca realizes the gravity of his careless words. Gripping, sobbing Arcia tightly, Sonia watches with pained eyes as Edward glares at Luca in protective terror. Edward sternly forbids joking about death, then ruffles Luca's hair and sends him with Arcia off to bed. Snuggling close in bed, tearful Arcia clings to Luca as Edward and Sonia whisper tenderly about their extraordinary boy. Armed with a shoulder-slung hoe and lunch pack, Edward and Luca wave farewell to Sonia and Arcia as they head to the fields. Field hands shout warm greetings across the rows, readying Edward and Luca for a day of testing their newest earthen construct. Rising from the dirt, Luca's full-sized golem swings its tool with savage force, sending chunks of soil flying across the furrow. Controlling the powerhouse with a flick of one hand, Luca muses that Arcia would weep at such an imposing, unrefined brute. Beyond the perimeter fence and dense canopy of the magic forest, Luca detects a hostile presence creeping toward the farmland. A booming wind blast from Luca sounds the emergency alarm, drawing Edward over as his son gestures toward the woods. 5 ferocious Magsbury wolves emerge from the shadows, their fangs bared for an immediate slaughter. Stunned by a daylight raid, Edward alerts the perimeter guard and orders Luca to sprint to the priest for an evacuation. Edward bellows orders for the bowmen to defend the fence, directing earth earth mages to pelt the beasts with heavy stones. Luca demands to stand and fight beside the militia, but Edward firmly cuts off his objections. Children must obey the adults during combat, Edward insists, leaving Luca stunned by the rebuke. Flashing a reassuring grin, Edward reminds him that a father protects the line, entrusting Luca to shield Sonia and Arcia. Edward chuckles with unshakable confidence, but Luca prepares a crucial parting gift before running toward the village. Panic strikes the archers over missing quivers, but Edward points to freshly crafted arrow stacks before Luca darts for the church. Roger stares in disbelief at the towering stockpile of ammunition, more than enough to annihilate every encroaching beast. Counting over 1,000 shafts, Roger reels when Edward reveals Luca produced the entire armory in seconds. Handing out bundles, Edward reminds Roger to drop old military titles and address him simply as a fellow townsman. Luca bursts into the church beneath a sacred tree of Syra mosaic, shouting that Magsbury wolves are invading the perimeter. Word that Edward is holding the line spreads quickly, sending terrified elders scrambling to notify Tashtan. Calming the sanctuary, the priest hears Edward's evacuation request and steps outside with Luca to assess the field firsthand, enhancing his eyesight to scan the ridge. The priest reassures an astonished Luca that Edward's defenders hold the advantage. Edward stands with his blade drawn as the villagers pull their bowstrings taut. Snarling across the grass, the ravenous beasts bare their fangs and prepare to pounce. Pointing his steel straight at the pack, Edward signals the volley. The archers release their fully drawn bows, sending a hail of arrows and stones screaming into the Magsbury wolves. Every projectile strikes true. Scattering the pack in defeat, the men raise their weapons in celebration, and the priest remarks that their massive supply of arrows saved the day. Luca beams with pride seeing his handmade shafts win the fight. When the stunned priest asks how one child crafted so many, the boy admits he simply kept going without knowing the limit. Calling the feat incredible, the priest asks Luca to visit the church later for a private discussion, just as Tashtan arrives lamenting that he missed the chance to join the fray. Striding over with wide grins, Edward and Roger approach the young hero. Luca praises their swift victory, and his father laughs that taking down such beasts was child's play. Roger declares that Luca's arrows turned the tide, and the villagers cheer him on. The priest checks for wounded men, but the hunters joke that the skirmish was easier than farm work. Across the field, the crew harvests pelts, fangs, and edible meat to share among the village. Edward and Roger report their haul to the priest and invite him over to inspect the spoils. Wondering about his next chore, Luca asks what to do, but Edward tells him to head home, rest, and share the news with Sonia. The boy waves goodbye as the men wave back warmly. Sitting in a circle, Roger notes that monsters never attacked by day before. Tashtan explains that magic draws beasts near, and the priest adds that predator instincts sense raw power. Puzzled, Roger asks if the pack sought a magic herb. The priest points out that herbivores hunt plants, but these bloodthirsty predators were clearly tracking a different scent. Lowering his voice, the priest suggests the wolves hunted Luca with such colossal volume and exquisite mana quality. Radiating from his body, the boy is an irresistible feast to wild beasts. Snapping in fury at the word food, Edward lunges forward and grabs the priest by his collar, leaving the surrounding men frozen in shock. Roger shouts Edward's former rank to snap him out of it. Tashtan urgently tells the hot-headed youngster to cool off and release the holy man. The priest quickly apologizes for his poor choice of words, but Edward still trembles with fury, grinding his teeth in frustration. Taking a deep breath, Edward steps back and apologizes for losing his temper, though the worried villagers watch him with deep concern. Hearing Roger and Tashtan use formal honorifics, Edward tells them to stop. He left his father's noble territory behind, and those days are long gone. Back at home, Luca recounts the battle to Sonia and little Arcia, who listen in wide-eyed amazement. Edward sits quietly nearby, resolving to protect his family and village at any cost. Announcing his return, Luca is greeted by Sonia holding a broom. Before she can ask a question, the boy explains that the hunters dismissed him early since butchering the beasts takes time. When Luca asks after Arcia, Sonia replies that the toddler is asleep. She adds that Liniel stopped by to help with chores and play with the baby and is currently washing up in the bath, barging into the bathroom to show off his magical water dolls. Luca catches Liniel completely off guard. The entire cottage echoes with her panic-blustered shriek. Sonia sternly scolds Luca for barging into a girl's bath, making him promise to always knock first. Liniel forgives the clumsy blunder, blushing as Sonia calls her son an utter fool. Liniel thanks Luca for his heroics, mentioning that Roger praised his arrows. The humble boy insists he did almost nothing since the clash ended before he even reached the chapel. Hearing the word church jolts Luca's memory, the priest asked to speak speak with him in private. Arriving at the chapel under clear skies, Luca is warmly welcomed by the priest and a sweet, smiling young woman standing beside him. Luca politely greets the priest and Sister Ulrika, and the holy man thanks him for the promised visit. The boy sheepishly admits that he nearly forgot and mentions his awkward mishap with Linnea, leaving Sister Ulrika thoroughly surprised. A dizzy spasm hits Luca as he wonders why his mind feels so strange, watching him clench his teeth in agonizing pain. The priest and Sister Ulrika tense up in alarm. Kneeling beside Luca, the priest clasps his hand and rests a palm on his shoulder, whispering words of comfort. Gentle warmth radiates through the boy, soothing his distress. Calmed by the priest's gentle manna, Luca thanks him for easing the strange spell. The holy man notes that children are sensitive to mana shifts, but Luca glances over at Sister Ulrika. Shock and grief overwhelm Sister Ulrika as silent tears stream down her cheeks, clearly shaken to her core by the sight of the boy. When the priest calls out to Sister Ulrika, the priestess offers a tearful apology and rushes outside to compose herself. Puzzled by her reaction, Luca asks what troubled Sister Ulrika. The priest explains that she carries her own deep sensitivities, growing easily moved to tears with age. Shifting the topic, Luca asks why he was summoned to the church. The priest reveals it is about the boy's extraordinary magical power, leaving Luca baffled. The priest explains that the immense mana radiating from Luca draws demonic predators straight toward the barrier. The realization hits Luca like a lightning bolt. Connecting the dots, Luca asks if yesterday's beasts attacked because of his aura. The priest admits that, although it cannot be proven with absolute certainty, the odds are undeniable. Reassuring the boy, the priest offers to train him in mana containment, determined to help Luca master locking his overwhelming power inside his own body. Luca thanks the priest, who notes that mana should never leak outward except during spell casting, warning that self-taught instincts can only take a prodigy so far. Flaring his own energy, the priest unleashes a radiant aura that leaves Luca standing frozen, completely mesmerized by the brilliant spectacle before his eyes. Awed by the display, Luca marvels at how completely the priest concealed such vast power, but the holy man humbly replies that Luca's true potential far exceeds his own. Seeing Luca perceive his energy so clearly, the priest commends his keen sensory talent and formally offers to teach him mana concealment, earning the boy's eager gratitude. Holding his arms, the priest summons a swirling ribbon of fire, explaining that mana flows within every living being to fuel all forms of spellcraft. The priest explains how a mage can draw and blend environmental mana to prevent exhaustion. Hearing this, Luca realizes his childhood self-training was built on backward assumptions. Since infancy, Luca had invented his own terms without knowing this world's system, calling mana compression chakra, external energy draw the cycle, and spellcasting magic oscillation. Clutching his head in embarrassment, Luca realizes his homemade chakra was compression, circulation was absorption, and fluctuations were mixing all along. Breaking down the method, the priest instructs Luca to wrap his vast reserves in a thin, invisible membrane of mana, sealing every trace of energy from prying eyes. Seeing the boy turn pale from overthinking, the priest asks if he feels ill, but Luca assures him that he grasps the concept of concealment. With the theory clear, the priest urges Luca to test the concealment technique right on the spot, and the nervous boy nods in agreement. Focusing his inner flow, Luca wraps his mana tight, flawlessly replicating the priest's technique. The holy man inspects the barrier with an approving smile, resting a finger on his chin. The priest nods in deep satisfaction, declaring Luca's concealment mastery nothing short of exceptional. Thanking Edward and promising to keep training, Luca sprints toward the house as his father shouts after him to stay safe. The Holy Father frowns after the boy, noticing how heavily weighed down Luca looked today. Pushing open the iron-trimmed wooden door, the priest steps into the courtyard with a low, heavy creak. Sunlight pours over blooming flowers and a massive tree within the courtyard as Sister Ulrika asks if Luca has already left. Sister Ulrika weeps openly, mourning the unfair burden placed on such an innocent child before the weary Holy Father. Resting her palm against the ancient bark, Sister Ulrika laments that not even the sacred tree of Syra could shield Luca. Ancient roots anchor the sacred tree of Syra deep into the earth, upholding a divine sanctuary across the surrounding realm. Its divine barrier was meant to cloak the boy, yet the Holy Father admits the tree failed to conceal Luca's aura. When the priest questions if Luca's raw mana pool is to blame, Sister Ulrika insists it is his breathtaking, pristine purity. Beasts caught scent of that radiant light through the barrier, yet Edward's concealment training will now keep Luca safe. Removing her headdress to reveal long elven ears, Sister Ulrika vows alongside the priest to defend the tree and protect Trame. Half-elves still have much to learn in their youth, she notes, though the Holy Father chuckles that he is an infant beside her. A playful smile touches Sister Ulrika's lips as she asks if he just called her old, sending the flustered priest stammering. Elves take immense pride in their long years, growing with the patient, unhurried strength of great timber. Sister Ulrika notes that despite their youthful skin, half-elves outlive mortals, yet remain mere saplings to pure kin. True high elves, the ancient forebears of her race, retain an ageless youth that defies the passage of centuries. If the Holy Father ever encounters a high elf, Sister Ulrika warns him never to mock their childlike face. Credit belongs not to her alone, Sister Ulrika reminds him, but to the noble lord who discovered the sacred tree of Syra. Trame owes its foundation to Margrave Christoffel Callisto, earning the Holy Father's heartfelt prayers of gratitude. Out in an open clearing, Luca rolls across the grass holding his head, burning with embarrassment over his childish outburst. Sitting upright, Luca channels compression, absorption, and mixing before sealing the radiant burst beneath concealment. Colliding those mana flows leaves behind an unidentifiable smooth round stone resting at the edge of the grass. Exhaling a breath of relief after venting his frustration, Luca leaves the crafted stone behind and heads home at dusk. Sonia chides Luca for returning late, though Edward excuses his exhaustion after learning Arcia has been waiting to bathe, promising Arcia only a short playtime with her water dolls tonight. Luca smiles as their parents watch with fond amusement. Edward explains to Sonia that mastering concealment is the only way to keep their son safe from prowling beasts. Morning sunlight floods the kitchen as Sonia slices apples, watching Edward lean back in his chair, rubbing his chin in thought. Extending an open hand, Luca explains that the Holy Father drilled him on concealment, though he remains unsure of his skill. Standing 20 paces back would fool even seasoned veterans like himself, Edward points out with a proud grin. An eager spark enters Luca's voice as he offers to demonstrate an alternate method of cloaking his internal mana. Cheeks flushed with excitement, Luca explains that he learned to form a hollow boundary before layering mana over his frame. Drawing all ambient mana inside his core, Luca casts an empty barrier and seals an outer radiant shell over the vacuum. Where the priest taught a single barrier, Luca's technique deploys dual overlapping shells to erase his presence completely. Edward tumbles backward out of his chair in shock, leaving Sonia gasping at the empty air where Luca stood a second ago. Luca waves his hands to reassure his bewildered parents, right before a panicked shriek echoes through the cottage. Tears streaming down her face, Arcia rushes forward into the room as Luca reaches out in confusion, crying that she does not want her brother to vanish. Arcia clings tight as Luca promises he is right beside her. Edward marvels at the flawless stealth, but Sonia warns Luca never to cast such total concealment without good cause. Questioned by Edward, Arcia insists she can track Luca's mana signature no matter where he wanders. The toddler points a tiny finger out the window, pinpointing the exact spot where Luca stood during his morning training. Disbelief grips Edward as he realizes his daughter sensed Luca across rolling hills, winding paths, and distant mountain ridges. Sensing mana across open pastures reveals an extraordinary gift, and Luca beams with pride for his little sister. Edward laughs that Arcia inherited their keen bloodline, as Luca promises to hide his mana from dangerous forest beasts. Luca softens his concealment so Arcia can keep hold of his trace, bringing a bright smile to the toddler's face. When Luca doubts his technique, Sonia reassures him that Arcia simply possesses supernatural sensory awareness. Arcia giggles that love guides her senses, prompting Luca to stroke her head with deep gratitude. Watching his remarkable children thrive, Edward feels warmth, knowing Margrave Christoffel Callisto would be proud of them too. Sonia calls everyone to the table, preparing father and son for a hearty morning meal before work in the fields. Memory pulls Edward back to his guard days, where tipsy tavern patrons teased him for carrying a bouquet of flowers on duty. The drunkards laughed off the Margrave's bastard, mocking Edward as nothing more than a concubine's son and fellow commoner. Houndsmen tease that an educated officer should stop stalling and marry Sonia already so they can uncork the wedding wine. Edward waves them off with a grin, knowing the time has come. Bitter memories echo in the mind of Edward, haunted by cruel nobles mocking him as the child of a concubine whose mother died giving birth. Christoffel Callisto urged the boy to ignore the venomous whispers, promising Edward that blood alone mattered, and the boy nodded in quiet obedience. Tucked beneath cold blankets, young Edward wept in solitude, aching over the mother who slipped away before he could know her embrace. Bouquet in hand, Edward strides through the bustling streets, blind to the crowd, as dreams of building a home with Sonia fill his heart. A desperate cry snaps Edward back to reality as a familiar voice rings out, pleading for someone to stop. The son of the Viscount grips Sonia against her will, ignoring her demands to let go as she declares her heart already belongs to Edward. Fury erupts as Edward lands a crushing punch across the nobleman's face, sending him sprawling to the dirt as Sonya cries out in relief. 3 guards draw steel against Edward, shielding the wounded noble who shrieks in outrage over a commoner daring to strike his flesh. Sonya desperately warns Edward to stand down before the noble rank, shifting the conflict to the grand church housing the sacred tree of Syra. The portly Viscount demands ruthless punishment for Edward, dismissing the status of Christophel Callisto as his bandaged son sneers beside him. Head bowed, Edward listens in silence as Christophel Callisto presents formal remorse on behalf of his son to appease the tribunal. Christophel Callisto offers to strip Edward of his military commission, exiling him to develop the Forbidden Lands and pay full restitution. Banished until the debt is cleared, Edward faces the deadly Forbidden Lands where dragons and elves roam, delighting the injured noble. Invoking the god of the covenant, the high priest binds Edward with contract magic, sealing him within the Forbidden Lands until the debt is paid. Stepping before the altar under the watchful gaze of Christophel Callisto, Edward places a hand on his chest and accepts the binding pact. Greed flares as the son of the Viscount rejects the settlement, stunning his own father by demanding far harsher terms for his bruised pride. Demanding raw harvests from the Forbidden Lands and the death penalty for any unpaid balance, the arrogant fool seals a deal Christophel Callisto accepts. Masking his true intent, Christophel Callisto grants the request as the Viscount's son cuts off his panicking father to finalize the trap. Surrounding Edward, the priest invokes the god of the covenant, unleashing contract magic as brilliant light floods the hall to seal the oath. Back at the estate, Christophel Callisto chuckles over the mess Edward made, signaling Tashtan to pour a rich bottle of wine. Seated across the table, Edward bows his head in profound regret, apologizing to Christophel Callisto for the reckless brawl. A warm chuckle escapes Christophel Callisto, praising Edward for having the spine to defend the woman he loves above all else. Taming the Forbidden Lands sounds like madness to Edward, recalling the grim warning that angering an elf can wipe an entire nation from existence. Christophel Callisto adds that crossing a high elf guarantees total extinction, leaving Edward visibly unnerved by their terrifying might. Glass in hand, Christophel Callisto turns to Sister Ulrika for confirmation, leaving Edward stunned as she confirms the terrifying lore. Introducing herself with a gentle smile, Sister Ulrika reveals her half-elf heritage and assures Edward that she holds no vindictive grudges. Deeply honored, Edward bows in respect before Christophel Callisto explains he summoned Sister Ulrika personally, observed quietly by Tashtan. The discovery of the sacred tree of Syra on their new land leaves Edward breathless at the thought of safeguarding a divine world branch. Sister Ulrika explains that Christophel Callisto summoned her to commune with the sacred tree of Syra, using divine blessings to clear every debt. Endless fields of magical herbs will fund their swift repayment, revealing to a stunned Edward that Christophel Callisto planned this masterstroke all along. A mocking smirk crosses Christophel Callisto as he ridicules the greedy son of the Viscount for blindly walking into his own demise. Sipping his wine, Christophel Callisto promises that the arrogant brat will soon face ruin for his greed as Tashtan stands solemnly by. With Tashtan, expert farmers, and Sister Ulrika pioneering the Forbidden Lands, Edward expresses gratitude before asking Christophel Callisto about Sonya. Heavy sorrow burdens Edward, who fears he must let Sonya go rather than drag her into the lethal perils of the unknown. Christophel Callisto challenges Edward to deliver that painful farewell in person, gesturing toward the shadow at the doorway. Sister Ulrika gestures toward the doorway where a tearful Sonya stands, clutching her chest as Edward calls her name in disbelief. Blaming herself for his exile, Sonya weeps, but Edward insists the fault is his alone and urges her to stay behind where she is safe. Refusing separation, Sonya throws herself into the embrace of Edward, crying out that she will follow him to the ends of the earth. Tears stream down the cheeks of Sonya as she vows her joy exists only by his side, meeting the tender gaze of Edward. Pledging eternal devotion, Sonya melts into Edward as he holds her tight, confessing he desires nothing more than a shared future together. Christophel Callisto instructs Tashtan to arrange one final blessing before departing for the Forbidden Lands, receiving a respectful bow. Dressed in wedding finery inside the chapel, Edward and Sonya stand before the priest, vowing to love and protect each other even in the Forbidden Lands. United in joyful vows, Edward and Sonya embrace as Christophel Callisto toasts, Tashtan dabs away tears, and Sister Ulrika cheers the newlyweds. 1 year into their frontier life in Trame, Edward bursts through the doorway breathless, calling out for Sonya in desperate anticipation. Beside Sister Ulrika and Caroline, Sonya cradles a crying bundle in her arms, announcing with a glowing smile that they have a healthy baby boy. Overcome with emotion, Edward wipes his tears and thanks Sonia for her courage, as Caroline and Sister Ulrika watch with warm smiles. Gently taking Luca into his broad hands, Edward marvels at his newborn son, bringing a blissful laugh to the lips of Sonia. Studying the infant, Edward notices Luca has pitch black hair unlike his own golden locks, or the brown hair of Sonia, as the child stares up in wonder. Caroline smiles warmly, noting how rare and miraculous it is for a child to be born, looking completely different from both parents. Sister Ulrika narrows her eyes, demanding if Edward doubts Sonia's fidelity. Edward stumbles back in horror, swearing he trusts his wife completely. Lifting the newborn high in both hands, Edward announces the boy's name will be Luca. From the bed, Sonia beams with quiet pride. This humble cottage marks a fresh start for them all. Edward looks around the room, grateful for the family he promised to protect. Out in the fields, Toshton rushes over in a panic, shouting that Luca's life hangs by a thread. The warning strikes Edward like a physical blow. The priest warns that Luca drained his internal mana to the brink of death. Inside the house, Edward bursts in, frantically demanding an explanation. Without immediate intervention, the infant will not survive. Sonia clutches her head in despair as Edward begs for a way to save their son. Combining both parents' mana can reignite the boy's fading core. The priest confirms that pooling their energy will restore the child. Flanking the cradle, Edward and Sonia pour their mana into Luca. Edward begs his boy to fight, swearing not even the gods will take his son. Tears stream down Sonia's face as Luca opens his eyes. Holding the boy close, Edward vows to protect him from whatever the world throws at them. Years pass, and a grown Luca calmly raises a hand to wave goodbye to his parents before heading out for the day. Waving back from the doorway, Edward and Sonia watch Luca meet Linnea on the path, both exchanging morning greetings with bags in hand. Sonia remarks on how close Luca is with Linnea, Toshton's granddaughter, whose father Roger brought her to Traham after her mother passed. A lingering worry still bothers Sonia about Luca's unusual demeanor, prompting Edward to wonder if it stems from his infant crisis. Out in the dirt, Luca works tirelessly with his farm tools, channeling magic and muttering with fierce joy about making the most of his new life. Covering her face, Sonia breaks down in tears over how Luca never smiles like normal children, leaving Edward stunned by her grief. Haunted by Luca's emotionless gaze, Edward wraps his arms around Sonia, blaming himself for failing to notice his son's inner struggle. Seeking answers, Edward and Sonia bring Luca to the chapel of the Sacred Tree of Syra, where Sister Ulrika warmly introduces herself to the boy. Gazing up in awe, Luca marvels at the majestic canopy of the Sacred Tree of Syra, unable to pull his eyes away from its radiant branches. Sister Ulrika offers Luca a honey confection harvested from the Sacred Tree of Syra, urging him with a gentle smile to channel his mana. Stunned by what she senses, Sister Ulrika dismisses Sonia and Luca to go home, firmly insisting that Edward remain behind alone. Before Edward can react, Sister Ulrika lunges forward, knocking her veil loose and pinning him by the throat in front of the startled priest. Sister Ulrika demands to know why foul contract magic is bound to Luca. Edward wheezes through clenched teeth, confused by her harsh accusation. Gasping against her grip, Edward insists he would never inflict contract magic on his own son, prompting the priest to urge Sister Ulrika to stop, releasing her hold. Sister Ulrika offers an apology, realizing Edward genuinely harbors no ill intent toward his family. Edward asks what sinister presence she detected, and Sister Ulrika admits she felt a dark curse coiling within the boy. Sister Ulrika explains that when Luca emptied his mana as an infant, the rupture allowed dark energy to seep into his core. Edward remembers pouring his and Sonia's mana into the baby to revive him, only for horrific realization to strike him mid-sentence. Shock paralyzes Edward as he realizes the contract magic binding his own soul bled directly into Luca during the infusion. The priest confirms that Edward's transferred mana carried the deadly shackles of contract magic straight into his newborn son. Memories of the Viscount's son, threatening execution for breaking the pact, flash through Edward's mind, crushing him with guilt over Luca's fate. When the priest asks if she can purge it, Sister Ulrika warns that any forceful removal could kill Luca, advising them to stay vigilant instead. Sister Ulrika notes that once Edward fulfills the harvest tribute from the Forbidden Lands, the contract magic on Luca should naturally dissolve. Patience remains their safest course. Sister Ulrika urges Edward to watch over Luca and protect the boy as his family, promising her full support. Sister Ulrika receives Edward's deep, humbled bow of gratitude. Shouldering a heavy supply pack, Edward leads Sonia and Luca out into the countryside, determined to build a brighter future for his family. Down by the stream, Edward helps Luca haul a thrashing fish from the water, reaffirming his pledge to shield the boy from harm. Holding the reins steady on horseback, Edward keeps a reassuring grip on a nervous Luca as they ride across the plains. Deep down, Edward vows to teach Luca to ignore the scornful glares of those who look down on their lineage. Gathered beneath a tree for lunch, Sonia smiles as Edward pats Luca on the head, both parents treasuring the warmth of their shared bond. Cradling a newborn daughter in her arms, Sonia announces the arrival of their baby girl over the infant's loud, healthy wails. Edward beams and names the newborn Arcia, helping Luca gently cradle his new baby sister alongside sister Ulrika and Caroline. Gentle days follow as Luca rocks Arcia to sleep, plays with her, and guides her first steps across the meadow under Edward and Sonia's proud gaze. A genuine smile graces Luca's face as he molds liquid figurines with water magic, delighting little Arcia as she reaches for the floating shapes. Overcome with emotion, Edward weeps tears of joy, thanking Sonia, Luca, and Arcia for giving his life meaning despite the burden of contract magic. Gathering Sonia, Arcia, and Luca into a tight embrace, Edward feels whole again, his heart filled with peace as Luca rests a hand on his chest. Villagers watch in astonishment as Luca directs 3 handcrafted earth golems at once, proving how much his daily training has sharpened his skill. Using wind magic to whistle audio cues to his constructs, Luca explains his technique to Edward, who scratches his head in bemusement. Edward barks that the high-pitched whistling is deafening the whole field, causing Luca and all 3 golems to flinch in unison, warning that such wind whistles mimic alarm sirens and rattle the workers. Edward tells Luca to apologize to the startled villagers. Humbled, Luca bows to the amused farmers as Edward privately marvels at the boy's genius and realizes the time has come for formal magic training. Inside the village church, the priest welcomes the gathered villagers from the altar, with Sister Ulrika standing calmly at his side. Sonia smiles from the wooden bench, watching Luca, Arcia, and Lineal listen. As the priest introduces the world's most vital force, magic. From the front pew, Aiden boasts that he can already cast spells without lessons, drawing an amused nod from the priest. Eager to prove his skill with everyday magic, Aiden conjures a spark that singes his father, earning a swift smack to the head. The priest explains that elemental magic governs 4 core attributes: water, fire, earth, and air, accessible to everyone for daily life. Luca rests his chin in thought as little Arcia mimics him, realizing his water puppets and clay figures were everyday magic all along. Reaching toward the boy's blistered fingers, the priest prepares to demonstrate an entirely different art to Aiden's startled father. Healing light mends the burn instantly, demonstrating how the magic of life restores other people rather than the caster. Free of pain, Aiden inspects his restored fingers in amazement as Luca notes how magic branches into specialized disciplines. Attributing this recovery to the god of life, the priest cracks a joke that breaks the tension and sends laughter through the pews. Moving to the next topic, the priest urges the villagers to study body reinforcement for their everyday protection. Aiden immediately brags that he already knows physical enhancement, only for his father to snap that he has it all wrong. Clarifying the mistake, the priest notes that Aiden merely flared raw mana, prompting the boy to ask how to unlock real power. True strength requires disciplined training until a distinct internal click signals that a new skill has been unlocked. Luca recognizes that exact feeling from when he fused separate clay pieces together, triggering his own skill progression. Lineal watches Luca with keen curiosity as he drifts deep into thought, piecing together the world's skill mechanics. The terminology mirrors the video games from his past life in Japan as little Arcia dozes off in Sonia's warm embrace. Looking across the room, the priest asks if anyone knows which deity governs the magic of physical reinforcement. Blurted out by Aiden, a wildly incorrect guess earns another reprimand from his father as Luca ponders the true answer. Besides Sonia and sleeping Arcia, Lineal raises her hand to name the god of power, blushing when Luca smiles at her accuracy. Physical reinforcement sharpens reflexes and muscle density, known in certain distant lands as aura or ki. With Sister Ulrika listening quietly behind him, the priest reviews creation magic, life magic, and power enhancement. Far beyond these everyday arts lies an extraordinary power spoken of only in dusty records and ancient myths. Supreme creation magic commands absolute dominion over reality, granting the power to manifest anything into existence. 6 fundamental affinities govern magical nature, the primal elements of water, fire, earth, and wind alongside light and darkness. Uncovering an individual's innate affinity requires specialized incantations, inscribed circles, and focused sensory rites. Ancient traditions revere creation magic as true craft, governed directly by the supreme god of creation, free from rigid chants or materials. Creation magic draws its strength purely from the caster's vivid imagination. creation. Master mages value this art above all else because of its limitless flexibility in shaping reality. Luca reflects on his animated clay workers and water dolls, wondering if his ability to shape ideas is actually creation magic. Scratching his head, Aiden asks why everyday magic differs from creation magic if both can conjure water and fire. Raising the insightful question, the priest explains that the god of creation bestowed these gifts to help mankind thrive. People frequently mix up everyday elemental spells with creation magic when warming near a hearth or drinking fresh spring water. Bringing his finger to a candle wick, the priest lights a small flame to demonstrate how everyday magic obeys natural physical laws. The candle flame sustains itself on wax, but creation magic operates under starkly different rules as Luca watches closely. Channeling creation magic, the priest summons raw fire into a blazing bird that glides forward, leaving Aiden wide-eyed with awe. A single snap of his fingers severs the mana flow, causing the fiery construct to vanish as if it never existed. Water conjured through everyday magic is completely real, providing genuine hydration and nourishment when consumed. In contrast, water shaped by creation magic cannot hydrate the body, vanishing inside like hollow air. Aiden blurts out that everyday magic is vastly superior, earning a rebuke from his father even as the priest nods in agreement. Everyday elemental spells channel the living pulse of nature, granted by the divine creator who formed their world. Understanding dawns across Luca's face as the fundamental principles of magic click into sharp focus. Pure constructs of creation magic evaporate once mana runs out, yet a puzzling inconsistency lingers in his mind. Luca recalls that his clay workers never vanished when his mana hit zero. They simply froze in place, retaining their solid form. If his constructs endured without mana, then he wielded everyday magic rather than creation magic, leaving him utterly baffled. As Aiden openly admits his own confusion, the priest explains that each branch of magic activates a different bodily vessel. The god of life governs crown and heart. The god of the covenant rules the brow. Creation magic sits at the throat, and the god of power rests above the lower mana core. Still thoroughly baffled, Aiden admits he understands none of it, sparking laughter as the priest emphasizes the value of mastering these nodes. Unlike complex constructs, everyday elemental magic commands the four primal forces, creating enduring matter that survives on its own. Power magic, known as aura, directly strengthens physical durability, muscle output, and the sharpness of every sense. Life magic mends flesh and bone, yet creation magic commands all six attributes at once, unraveling the moment its mana supply runs dry. Calling Luca forward, the priest asks to see his spellcraft. Linnea cheers him on. Aiden warns him not to blow it, and Luca nods with a confident grin. Stepping up, Luca offers to cast something basic, unaware the priest and Sister Ulrika only want to test how fast his mana pool is growing. Extending both hands, Luca shapes a liquid doll for Arshia. Both the priest and Sister Ulrika track the fluid mana with keen focus. Arshia snaps awake with a giggle, shouting the name Poon at the floating toy as the priest praises Luca for such refined everyday magic. Puzzled by the priest's reaction, Luca asks whether shaping a living figure counts as creation magic rather than basic household utility. Twirling mana on her fingertip, Sister Ulrika explains that everyday magic can shape spheres and blocks, a gift from the god of creation for daily labor. Closing his eyes, Luca realizes his intense mana control has simply stretched ordinary household magic far past its intended limits. Even so, basic household spells could never manifest a living beast of pure flame like the priest's fiery bird. Remarking that sculpting moving human dolls feels simpler than complex rituals, Luca leaves Sister Ulrika staring in total disbelief. Stunned, Sister Ulrika warns him that mortals cannot mimic divinity, since only the god of creation holds the authority to craft human forms. A farmer rushes into the church holding a strange round stone found near the village edge, the exact relic Luca forged during a past surge of frustration. Recognizing his own handiwork, Luca tenses up as the priest inspects the gem-like mineral, and Sister Ulrika reaches out to take it. Pressing a fingertip to its smooth surface, Sister Ulrika notes that the dense material actively pulses with reactive mana. The priest marvels at the extraordinary composition, though Sister Ulrika assures him the concentrated energy rests completely dormant, deciding it is safest kept inside the sanctuary. Sister Ulrika takes custody of the relic under the puzzled gazes of the villagers. Luca quietly kicks himself, recalling how recklessly he discarded the stone after molding it during an impulsive emotional outburst. Concluding the lesson, the priest dismisses the gathering, though Luca still burns with embarrassment over his careless mistake in the field. Other children crowd around Luca as the priest confers with Sister Ulrika, who admits the boy possesses staggering latent power. Sister Ulrika offers a faint smile, convincing herself that Luca's claims of creating human likenesses are just wild childhood fantasies. Outside in the yard, Luca's mud golem Bon sits silently, a reality that completely contradicts her doubts about shaping living humanoid forms. Inside the grand estate, a shaken messenger informs Margrave Christoffel Callisto that searchers finally recover the remains of the Viscount's son after 10 years. Margrave Christoffel Callisto offers formal condolences, noting the carriage plunged into the magic forest where ruthless beasts prowl without mercy. Permission to construct a tomb is granted without question, with Margrave Christoffel Callisto remarking that dwelling on blame changes nothing now. Calling the death a blessing after a life of reckless indulgence, the Margrave orders a burial with full honors, drawing a grateful bow from the Viscount. Set on attending the wake, Margrave Christoffel Callisto praises Nicholas for combining the journey with an inspection of the Viscount's domain, presenting the itinerary to the Viscount. Nicholas keeps order, as Margrave Christoffel Callisto dryly notes that navigating constant threats is the duty of a ruler. Brushing off the Viscount's nervous protests, the Margrave sternly declares that commoners and soldiers are the realm's true backbone, never to be squandered. Nicholas cautions against provoking the Viscount, but the Margrave scoffs at the noble's deceit, asking instead how Edward and Luca are thriving in Trame. Sending greetings to Toshton and Roger, Margrave Christoffel Callisto looks to the sky, praying Edward and Luca stay strong against the looming curse. Deep within a flower-draped glade beneath a massive blooming tree, an elven figure laughs softly, detecting an extraordinary wave of magic. Flower petals swirl across the clearing as the elven watcher smiles, homing in on the distinct resonance of a crafted magic crystal. Pondering what kind of artisan could forge such a stone, their gaze shifts toward the rugged border fence guarding the forbidden lands. Twisted branches arch over the dark floor of the magic forest, where vermin and centipedes scuttle past pools of foul black slime. Memory flashes to the Viscount, severing the carriage harness with a blade, cursing his useless son as the cart smashed the barrier and crashed down the cliff. Bubbling upward, the dark slime coalesces into the twisted silhouette of the Viscount's son, snarling with malice and vowing never to forgive Edward. Back in the village, little Arcia hums a cheerful tune, excitedly pointing her fingers toward a crafted wooden keyboard. One after another, Arcia taps the wooden keys, chiming out crisp, melodic notes from do to re and mi. Sitting beside his happy sister, Luca coordinates every movement, flicking his finger to generate acoustic vibrations right on cue. When Arcia strikes the FA key, Luca shapes compressed wind magic into tiny air blocks to produce the correct musical pitch. Seated on the floor, Arcia presses the keys and Luca rings the tones, fully absorbed in their game, as adults talk quietly behind them. Arcia mashes the keys faster and faster, but manually triggering every single acoustic pulse quickly exhausts Luca's focus. Head spinning from the rapid casting, Luca wishes he could fuse wind magic directly into the timbre so the keys resonate on their own. Curious at her brother's pause, Arcia watches as Luca experiences a pivotal breakthrough, visualizing fine threads of mana binding to the wood. Recalling Alia's lesson about mastering new skills, Luca feels that exact internal click unlock within his mana pathways. Delighted that the keys now chime automatically, Arcia plays freely, fueling Luca's clear-headed resolve to explore deeper magical horizons. Edward gently reminds the children to keep quiet for their guest Toshton, prompting an embarrassed Luca to apologize to both him and Arcia. Toshton dismisses the apology with an easy smile, thanking his hosts and bidding farewell to Edward and Sonia before heading out. Watching Toshton step out toward the woodland trail, Luca asks what they discussed, learning that his grandfather will visit them next. As Sonia clears the table, Edward confirms to an excited Arcia and curious Luca that he is visiting on official duty for the Margrave to inspect the harvest. Curious about their grandmother Caroline, Luca asks how she is doing, making Arcia joyfully repeat the word after him. Edward chuckles, explaining she is resting with Margrave Christoffel Callisto, though Sonia finds the abrupt move unnerving amid rising monster threats. Beasts from the magic forest are invading outer regions, driving local wildlife into panicked migration away from whatever terror stalks the trees. Unlike ordinary predators, monsters are humanoid creatures that wield magic, lurking in the shadows with hollow white eyes. Magical beasts are wild animals empowered by mana, prowling the borders with lowered snouts on the scent of prey. Fear grips little Arcia as she clutches her cheeks, sensing danger approaching before Luca can even ask if Trame is in peril. Pulling Arcia close, Luca holds her tight as Edward smiles, assuring them the sacred tree of Syra keeps anything worse than Magsbury wolves away. Dusk settles over the cabin, and Edward urges the kids to wash up and get a quiet night of rest. Sitting with his drink late into the night, Edward hopes Christophel Callisto arrives safely, though Sonia finds the rumors unsettling. Her eyes fill with worry, confessing all she wants is to live in peace alongside her family. Nodding in agreement, Edward turns to see Luca standing in the center of the room, letting out a sleepy yawn. Startled to see them awake, the parents watch Luca carry a tearful Arcia, who is spooked by the talk of monsters. Luca sheepishly apologizes for creeping around after bedtime, drawing surprised looks from both his parents. Scooping Luca up with a laugh, Edward insists family always stays together, as Sonia cradles Arcia to keep her fears away. With a confident grin, Edward promises to crush any beast that shows up, earning a nod from Arcia. Arcia happily chirps that Luca will be the one protecting them, sparking playful outrage from her father. Noticing the bottle on the table, Luca asks about the liquor, which Edward explains is brewed from magic herbs and packed with mana flavor. Curious about the sensation, Luca asks what mana tastes like, and Edward explains that any food rich in magic carries that distinct kick. Even the seasoned wolf meat they roasted earlier had that exact same magical essence. Watching his father pour a careful measure into a cup, Luca sees Edward savoring every exquisite sip. Seeing the tiny cups reminds Luca of the traditional sake sets from his past life in Japan. A glass decanter and small cups materialize onto the table with a loud clatter, stunning everyone before Luca realizes what happened. Staring in utter disbelief at the glassware conjured from nothing, Luca blinks and asks what just landed on the wood. Shock washes over him upon realizing the glassware perfectly matches the sake set he had pictured in his mind. Shaking off his shock, Edward asks what the tiny vessels are for, and Luca explains they are crafted for enjoying spirits. Confident the conjured glass will soon dissolve, Edward warmly thanks Luca for the gift as Sonia marvels at his talent. Tuning out their praise, Luca stands frozen, unable to comprehend how his thoughts turned into solid matter. A vivid image of the decanter and cups had flashed in his mind for only a split second before becoming real. Connecting this to the priest's teachings, Luca wonders if creation magic lets him manifest pure imagination into reality. As he struggles to understand how the spell triggered so effortlessly, a sharp wave of dizziness clouds his thoughts. Pouting from across the table, Arcia asks where her cup is, catching the whole family completely off guard. Tears well in her eyes as Arcia points to herself, demanding to know why she was left without a cup. Both parents turn their gaze to Luca, who clutches his head in panic as he realizes the mess he made. Desperate to make another cup for Arcia, Luca has no idea how to recreate the accidental spell. Sniffling at her brother, Arcia pleads for a gift, prompting Luca to quickly promise her something even better. With focused intent, Luca channels his energy between his hands until a radiant orb of pure mana begins to glow. Edward grins as he recognizes his son compressing pure mana, leaving Sonia bewildered by the spectacle. Everything clicks for Sonia regarding the church crystal, just as a smooth, radiant sphere solidifies in Luca's grip. Admiring the flawless sphere, Luca presents it with a smile, asking Arcia if this treasure will make her happy. Arcia beams with delight, reaching out for the glowing stone and happily thanking her brother. A blinding pillar of light strikes the table, revealing a kneeling high elf named Alia, who scoops up the stone with an intrigued smile. Examining the sphere in his hands, Alia notes with a graceful smile how remarkably well crafted it is. Bewildered by the stranger who materialized out of thin air, Luca watches as his parents bristle with hostility. Sonia knocks her chair over, shielding Arcia, who wails for her taken stone, as Edward raises his fists demanding Alia identify himself. Under the midnight sky, Sister Ulrika stands in her robes before the towering sacred tree of Syra. Looking up into the canopy, Sister Ulrika asks why the sacred tree of Syra summoned her, feeling its branches pulse with pure joy. A beam of light descends before the shrine, revealing the exact same high elf, Alia, leaving Sister Ulrika staring in disbelief. Sensing the overwhelming magic radiating from him, Sister Ulrika realizes this visitor is no ordinary elf. Awe-struck by the legendary high elf, she watches Alia raise his hand to acknowledge the majestic tree. Bowing with deep respect, Sister Ulrika introduces herself as the half-elf priestess of the sacred tree of Syra, though Alia waves off the formalities. Turning to Sister Ulrika, the visitor warns that speaking the true name of the sacred tree of Syra harms its life force, charging her to guard it. Sister Ulrika agrees before pressing the stranger on his purpose, but the traveler answers only with his name, Alia. Flashing an easy grin, Alia explains that his full elven title would take until dawn to recite, so Sister Ulrika asks what drew him to Trame. Stepping forward, Alia reveals that he came seeking the curious object the priestess recently received, leaving Sister Sister Ulrika puzzled. Chuckling over how his people perceive time differently, Aliyah clarifies that he seeks the spherical object brought to her a couple of days ago. Recognition strikes Sister Ulrika as she realizes he seeks the smooth stone sphere Luca conjured from pure mana. Regretfully, Sister Ulrika explains she already sent the orb to Tashtan for delivery to Margrave Christophel Callisto, drawing a sigh from Aliyah. Inquiring if the stone held mystical properties, Sister Ulrika watches Aliyah raise a single finger to explain. With an amused grin, Aliyah reveals the stone is completely ordinary. The true marvel is the craftsman who molded it. Stunned by his words, Sister Ulrika ponders how a resident of their humble village could create such flawless perfection. Pressing 2 fingers to his temple, Aliyah senses the creator's residual aura and vanishes in a pillar of radiant light. Placing her palm against the sacred tree of Syra, Sister Ulrika closes her eyes to trace Aliyah's mana signature. A clear vision enters her mind, revealing the rustic homestead on the forest edge where Luca lives. Bolting down the forest trail, Sister Ulrika prays Aliyah does not terrorize the household or start a panic. Inside the home, Sonia shields a crying Arcia in terror as Edward draws his blade on the intruder holding the stone, demanding answers. Edward shields his kin and questions the intruder, shocked that an elf slipped inside undetected. Calmly balancing the orb on his fingertips, Aliyah assures the family that he simply followed the trace of this stone. Little Arcia tearfully protests that the ball is hers, so Luca steps forward and tells Aliyah to return it to his sister. Standing his ground, Luca meets the elf's gaze, and Aliyah smiles knowingly upon finding the true prodigy. Gliding closer, Aliyah places a gentle hand on Luca's head and asks if he created the stone. Furious, Edward swings his steel blade to protect his son, but Aliyah effortlessly parries the strike with a bare hand. Broken steel clatters across the floor as Aliyah holds up an empty palm, calmly apologizing for the fright. Gripping the shattered hilt in shock, Edward freezes as Aliyah reflects that mortals should never test an elf's might. Gaze turning stern, Aliyah warns that provoking true elven wrath could bring doom to an entire kingdom. Undaunted by the demonstration, Luca introduces himself and boldly demands to know if the visitor is truly an elf. Softening his tone, Aliyah confirms his heritage and shares his name, inviting Luca to ask his next question. Luca demands to know why Aliyah barged into their home and terrorized his parents, catching the elf off guard. Pointing at Arcia's tear-streaked face, Luca scolds the elf for reducing his little sister to tears. Adding sharp resolve to his voice, Luca announces that the uninvited intrusion has thoroughly angered him. Offering a deep bow, Aliyah begs for forgiveness and admits his intense curiosity made him act without thinking. Handing the orb back to Arcia, Aliyah smiles as the little girl beams with joy and thanks him for returning it. Seeking to make amends, Aliyah asks how humans properly show remorse under the stern glares of Luca and Edward. Gasping for breath, Sister Ulrika races up the hill toward Luca's house to stop Aliyah from causing chaos. Bursting inside, Sister Ulrika gasps in shock to find Aliyah kneeling on the floor to apologize as Luca instructs him. Edward gestures toward the prostrating guest and asks Sister Ulrika if she knows him, as Arcia happily plays nearby. Shaken by the scene, Sister Ulrika reveals that Aliyah is a high elf, an ancient noble before whom even kings bow. Horrified, Edward and Sonia drop to their knees beside Sister Ulrika in panic, leaving Luca and Arcia bewildered. Hearing this, Luca marvels at Aliyah's status, never having realized that Sister Ulrika carried half-elven blood. Once seated, Sister Ulrika admits she hid her elven ears to avoid panic, and Aliyah laughs off fearful mortal rumors. Sister Ulrika gently asks Luca if her heritage frightens him, but the boy shakes his head without hesitation. Watching Aliyah sip from his cup, Luca adds that even high elves are harmless once people talk things through. Beaming with delight, Aliyah extends his hand to Luca and eagerly offers to become his friend. As Arcia cradles her toy, Aliyah praises the wondrous orb, though Luca shrugs it off as an ordinary trinket. Scoffing at the dismissal, Aliyah declares that lack of enchantment does not diminish a flawless masterpiece. Leaping to his feet in excitement, Aliyah startles the table as he launches into a lecture on the artifact. Gesticulating with both hands, Aliyah rambles on about the crystal until Luca politely asks him to get to the point. Promising a practical demonstration, Aliyah channels radiant energy into his palms, conjuring a wooden blade. Holding up the newly forged weapon, Aliyah points out how much mana is required to craft even simple wood. Brandishing the sword, Aliyah stresses that shaping matter is the hardest feat of creation magic, until Sister Ulrika cuts him off. Pouting as his lecture gets cut short, Aliyah huffs at Sister Ulrika, though the family politely thanks him for the lesson. Ordinary mortals simply lack the context for ancient lore, leaving the entire room stunned by the High Elf's massive knowledge dump. Noticing their blank stares, Alia sheepishly offers to repeat it all before handing a wooden sword to Edward as an apology for trespassing. Edward promises Alia he will speak with Tashtan regarding Luca's future. Sonia then chides her son for concealing the truth at church, prompting a quick apology. Beaming with delight, Alia thanks Edward warmly for granting him a chance to stay. Luca grins at the gentle High Elf, amazed they ever feared him, before Edward and sister Ulrika decide it is time to head home into the night. Across rolling hills, a two-horse carriage carries Christoffel, Callisto, and Caroline, who calmly reflect on the successful funeral of the Viscount's son. Straightening her glasses with a grave expression, Caroline doubts whether the Viscount was truly the sole mastermind behind the plot against Edward. She refuses to let her grandchildren suffer under contract magic, though Christoffel dismisses her objections as typical half-elf defiance against noble law. As headmaid of the Callisto estate, the half-elf Caroline shoulders heavy duties and remains deeply tied to sister Ulrika in the village of Trame. Their tangled bloodlines make Caroline both Edward's grandmother and Christoffel's sharpest confidant. Christoffel reflects on their lineage. Caroline's daughter bore Edward before eventually marrying Tashtan, the headman of Trame, claiming her place as the proud grandmother of Luca and Arcia. Caroline announces their arrival, prompting Christoffel to halt the carriage. Stepping into the open air, Christoffel asks about the approaching threat, and Caroline senses roughly 200 men surrounding them. The Margrave calmly notes the crowd exceeds his expectations as an armed mob closes in. A bearded raider in an iron helmet raises his blade, shouting for his men to butcher the old nobleman first before claiming the woman and gold. Christoffel wonders whether attacking high nobility stems from fearless courage or utter foolishness, to which Caroline dryly votes for foolishness. Mocking their aristocratic rank, the bandit chieftain points his sword forward and orders a total charge. Raising an open palm, Christoffel prepares to demonstrate why nobility rules as blinding magical energy gathers in his grasp. A shockwave slams the chieftain backwards through the dirt, disarming him instantly as he chokes in terror at the display of pure magic. Christoffel calmly instructs the crawling survivor to look around after the man stammers that no single spell could slaughter 200 warriors. Across the field lie the lifeless bodies of his entire army, leaving the lone survivor paralyzed with disbelief. Confirming the grim reality of high-tier magic, Christoffel watches the broken chief stare into the mass graveyard. Caroline adjusts her spectacles, coldly explaining that the atmospheric shock crushed them like falling stone slabs. Collapsing into hysterical laughter, the bandit listens as Christoffel proclaims that true noble dominion rests on magic that can erase whole legions. A somber expression crosses Christoffel Callisto's face, acknowledging that aristocrats are little more than apex monsters guarding their domain. Resuming their journey, Christoffel realizes these bandits were not sent by the Viscount, but were desperate refugees fleeing a beast from the magic forest. Inside the carriage, Christoffel recalls that reports of this roaming monster first surfaced 10 years ago, right when his feud with the Viscount erupted. Noting the creature's trajectory toward the village of Tram, Christoffel questions how it has survived despite the massive bounty on its head. Caroline pushes up her glasses, explaining that the monster's rapid adaptability and cunning stealth make it an infuriating target to hunt. When Christoffel inquires about securing a priestess for the sacred tree of Syra, Caroline admits ordinary elves and half-elves lack the raw mana required. Only a high elf could commune with the sacred tree of Zyra, since their kin cultivated it, prompting Christoffel to ask what makes it distinct from ordinary trees. Without a true high elf to awaken its protective barrier, monster incursions will persist and ordinary elves remain powerless to stop them. As the carriage rolls forward, Christoffel muses that an exceptional human might rise to the task, though Caroline dismisses the thought as pure fantasy. Sharing a bath with Arcia, Luca crafts a glowing manosphere containing all four elements of earth, water, fire, and wind for his little sister to admire. Channeling specific mana, shifts the orb between azure water, crimson fire, amber wind, and earthen brown, delighting Arcia as Luca tests his precision. A sharp pang pierces Luca's chest, forcing him to clutch his ribs with a strained groan under Arcia's worried gaze. These recurring chest aches trouble Luca, yet his mana circulation and spell control have grown noticeably smoother after each flare-up. Tearing up, Arcia begs her brother not to fall ill, prompting Luca to offer a warm, comforting smile. Reassuring Arcia that her happiness keeps him healthy, Luca brightens the magical stone and vows to protect her smile at all costs. Luca begins to declare his duty as her big brother, but abruptly freezes as a distant sensation interrupts his words. Turning toward Arcia, Luca asks if she heard a mysterious voice calling out, but she shakes her head in confusion. Though Arcia craves his undivided attention, Luca's mind drifts as the spectral echo returns, stirring faint memories of his previous life. Arcia asks about the bizarre sound before Sonya calls out from the hallway, ordering both children to finish up and step out of the bath. Elsewhere in the dark, a pool of black, viscous liquid festers from a clot of mana beside a wheel, latching onto a host and sinking inside. Resurfacing memories reveal the arrogant Viscount's son confronting Christophel Callisto, brandishing a dagger and screaming furious demands, yielding only to aristocratic law at the time. The spiteful heir swore vengeance to wipe out the Callisto bloodline in the future. Faint apologies from his family echo in the darkness as his corrupted soul burns with hatred, blaming Edward and Sonya for his ruin. Gorging on pure hatred and trauma, the clot of mana coalesces into a dark slime entity, growing in strength as it manifests a viscous humanoid hand. Gazing out across the forested hills, the shadowy humanoid figure vows that everyone responsible for his demise will pay in blood. Back in Trame, Luca succeeds in creating Bon and Poon, two autonomous earth dolls that till the soil and carry stones without constant instruction. Lost in thought, Luca admits he needs to sharpen his skills far more often. Edward's warning rings in his mind. Creating too many clay dolls will terrify the villagers. Glancing down at his farming hoe, an idea sparks. With his mana ball training in mind, Luca grips the hoe and channels a steady energy stream to reinforce the metal. The blade strikes the soil and fractures instantly. Luca discovers that threading mana into solid tools is no easy feat, winding like a blind maze. As Edward once explained, material properties shift under mana pressure. Luca and Arcia watched him swing Alia's wooden sword, sharp enough to cut through magic. Across the field, two figures wave and approach to ask what the young boy is working on. The new recruit announces he joined the processing team today, and Jonathan admits his shock upon learning Luca created that enchanted stone. Hesitating under their curious gaze, Luca shifts uneasily until Edward steps forward, prompting his son to greet Aiden and Jonathan. Luca politely bows, welcoming both young Aiden and the seasoned Jonathan to the team. Jonathan warns that careless handling of magic herbs will drain a worker dry, prompting a stunned Aiden to ask if he is serious. Rubbing the back of his head, Luca realizes he forgot his manners, meeting Edward's amused gaze. Edward resolves that someone from the family must watch over Luca constantly, guarding him against undue burdens. A gentle pat on the head brings a smile to Luca's face as Edward cautions him not to overdo his training. Picking up a smooth stone, Luca concentrates his focus, knowing that coating an object with mana is simple, but infusing power inside is far harder. Luminous circuits ignite across the mineral, proving that guiding mana along precise paths significantly enhances an item's durability. Staring at the glowing rock, Luca connects the process to Ki body reinforcement, finding the internal pathways intuitive to trace. Deep fissures branch across the surface the moment Luca funnels too much mana into the fragile structure, leaking through every crack. Radiant mana threatens to trigger an explosive blast at any second. With a clenched fist, Luca wraps his forearm in dense mana, doubling his physical reinforcement. A swift sweep of his arm conjures a swirl of wind magic, creating a barrier to muffle the coming detonation. Channeling water magic, Luca wraps a fluid sphere around the rock to catch the shrapnel and contain the explosion. The stone detonates into shards, forcing Luca to squint and brace against the shockwave. Lowering his hands as the air clears, Luca exhales a shaky sigh, shaken by the close call. Wet pebble dust clings to his palm, a stark reminder to handle volatile mana with absolute care. Without warning, searing agony strikes his chest, draining the color from Luca's face as he clutches his ribs. Gritting his teeth against the piercing spasm, his legs give out, sending him tumbling toward the grass. Before he crashes into the dirt, two firm hands catch him from behind, halting his fall. Luca gasps out his thanks, turning to face his savior, only to freeze in utter shock. His two clay dolls are hoisting him upright, moving independently without any command. Standing before them, Luca holds up two fingers to test their awareness, stunned by their autonomous action. Both dolls raise their arms and sway side to side, instantly responding to Luca's silent intent. Reflecting on his mental commands, Luca wonders if an instinctive impulse triggered their reaction without his conscious knowledge. Across the lawn, Luca spots Edward, Toshtin, and Sonya, carrying Arcia, all staring in disbelief. Tears stream down Arcia's face, prompting a bewildered Luca to prepare words of comfort for his little sister. Mid-sentence, a violent spasm cuts him off as Luca gasps for breath, feeling an unnatural presence squirming within his core. An eerie voice resonates inside his skull, begging him not to leave, as Luca shuts his eyes against the agony. Edward rushes over and grips his shoulder in panic, but Luca forces a strained breath, claiming he is merely tired. In a flood of tears, Arcia throws herself into his arms, begging Luca not to lie to her. Sobbing against his chest, Arcia cries that she cannot bear to see her brother suffer or grow sick. Sonia explains that Arcia broke down on the way here, revealing that her sharp senses picked up Luca's distress. Hearing that little field work remains, Luca is puzzled when Edward orders him to stop and rest. Hoshton announces that Christophel Callisto has arrived as the Margrave's representative, delighting Arcia at the news of their grandfather. Gathering villagers confirm that Christophel Callisto is here, asking Edward why the envoy arrived ahead of schedule. Edward grimly reveals that a beast stampede has begun, driven toward Trame by the stirrings of a monstrous threat. Facing the anxious villagers, Edward warns that scouts spotted nearly 100 Magsbury wolves heading their way. Whispers of dread ripple through the crowd as Luca stands beside Sonia and Arcia, calculating the danger. Stepping forward to calm the crowd, Edward promises to investigate the threat alongside Christophel Callisto once order is restored. Arcia hugs Luca tightly and vows to protect him, touching his heart as the sun dips behind the mountain peaks. Stepping down from their carriage, Christophel Callisto suggests they pose as ordinary elders, earning an amused nod from Caroline. With an amused grin, Christophel Callisto jokes about apologizing to her husband, but Caroline dismisses his concern and reminds him to disguise himself. Disguised as an ordinary grandmother, Caroline carries luggage beside a hunched Christophel Callisto, who chuckles and bids Luca and Arcia wait. Passing beneath the village bell tower, Christophel Callisto grumbles about mimicking commoners, but Caroline remarks that the guise suits him. Deep within the magic forest, horned Magsbury wolves lurk with blank white eyes, thick drool dripping from their jaws. From the shadows, the stalker flicks its tongue toward the distant roofs of Tram, eager to unleash the agitated beasts. Beside the wolves, the Viscount's son sneers in anticipation, dark viscous liquid oozing from his mutated fingers. A knock rattles the door as Christophel Callisto announces his arrival to Luca and Arcia, and Caroline asks how they fare. Joyful greetings fill the room when Luca welcomes the pair. Edward waves with a smile, and little Arcia squeals in delight. After Christophel Callisto asks if the children recall him, Luca notices the striking resemblance between Edward and the elder. Luca finds Caroline far too youthful for a grandmother, but she simply smiles and marvels at how big the siblings have grown. Noting Caroline's pointed ears, Luca asks if she is an elf, alarming Edward, Sonia, and Christophel Callisto before she explains. Silent glances pass between Edward and Sonia, but Arcia innocently points to herself, prompting Luca to chuckle that she is partly elven. Privately, Edward recalls his own past shock upon learning that Caroline is actually the children's great-grandmother. A warm candlelit dinner is offered to their weary guests, and a famished Christophel Callisto gladly accepts beside Caroline. Sitting down to dine, Christophel Callisto affectionately pats Luca on the head as Caroline gazes warmly at Arcia. Christophel Callisto sips the freshly brewed liquor with praise, and Edward notes the drink still brimmed with mana. The crystal cup catches Christophel Callisto's eye, prompting him to ask where they acquired such masterwork glassware. Edward reveals that Luca created the glassware, making Christophel Callisto spin around in total bewilderment. When told the boy formed it through accidental magic, Christophel Callisto scolds Edward for equating glass creation to lighting a flame. Luca watches the debate as Christophel Callisto stresses that conjuring raw matter demands immense effort, which Edward concedes. Without warning, a faint memory echoes in Luca's mind, recalling a past birthday where obtaining such glass was nearly impossible. Pulled from his thoughts, Luca faces Christophel Callisto, who questions how the cups were forged without retaining any lingering mana. With all eyes on him and Christophel Callisto, Luca confesses he simply pictured a cup for Edward, and the object materialized. Christophel Callisto manifests a water sphere with his finger as a test, and Luca immediately replicates the everyday spell with ease. Shocked by the seamless execution, Christophel Callisto realizes Luca cast the sphere without causing the slightest magical distortion. Dropping his orb into the cup, Christophel Callisto calls an end to the test, yet Luca instantly dispels his own sphere into thin air. Before Luca can even lower his palm, Christophel Callisto and Caroline leap from the table, staring at him in utter astonishment. Caroline presses for answers, but Christophel Callisto cuts in, demanding how physical water conjured by basic magic could vanish. Luca blinks in confusion at their distress, calmly confirming that he simply unmade the water as though it were second nature. Edward and Sonia gaze anxiously at Christophel Callisto and Caroline, whereas little Arcia quietly munches through her dinner. Breaking the silence with a laugh, Caroline calls calls Luca a prodigy, and Christoffel Callisto pats the boy's head in proud approval. Turning to Sonia, Edward reminds her that even Alia praised Luca's extraordinary talent, and Sonia readily agrees. Curious, Christoffel Callisto asks who Alia is, only for Edward to casually explain that a high elf barged into their residence. Following a beat of frozen silence, both Christoffel Callisto and Caroline erupt in sheer disbelief over a genuine high elf. Caroline and Christoffel Callisto demand whether the elf is present, shouting down Edward's attempts to calm them. Edward clarifies that Sister Ulrika confirmed Alia entered an elven dream, meaning nobody can converse with him. Inquiring about the elven dream, Luca listens as Christoffel Callisto describes it as a deep synchronization with nature's mana. Caroline turns to Arcia, explaining that elves can hibernate for decades without food, and high elves sleep longer still. Edward rises from the table, predicting Alia will awaken in precisely 1 month, to Christoffel Callisto's astonishment. Bringing up Luca's conjured orb, Edward explains they must consult Christoffel Callisto about officially gifting the item to Alia. Baffled by high elf habits, Luca listens as Edward jokes that Alia likely went to sleep simply to avoid waiting a month. With night settling over Trame, Christoffel Callisto plans to greet the guest tomorrow, though Edward doubts Alia can be awakened. Glaring at his son, Christoffel Callisto insists proper etiquette is vital, reminding Edward of the terrifying legends surrounding elves. Caroline gravely adds that provoking an elf is foolish, since humans are no match, and an angered elf would destroy a kingdom. Both Caroline and Christoffel Callisto gawk as Edward and Luca laugh off the threat, calling Alia odd but harmless. Growing stern, Christoffel Callisto maintains that protocol must be upheld, knowing rumors never spread without genuine reason. Near the sacred tree of Syra, a sinister cloaked figure stands hidden in the dark, proving those ominous rumors true. High in the canopy, the demon girl smirks maliciously, muttering about Luca and the curious orb he created. To prepare for incoming threats, Christoffel Callisto organizes the villagers and stations lookouts atop tall wooden watchtowers. Villagers pile heavy stone blocks into a perimeter wall, driving sharpened wooden stakes into the ground to impale charging beasts. Determined to hold the line, Christoffel Callisto issues stern instructions to Edward and a nearby laborer wielding a heavy hammer. Luca traces glowing figures across a wooden screen, delighting Arcia and her friend with his playful magic. Between chores, he hauls a basket of carrots to Sonia as Arcia steadies a chair by the laundry line. A harsh alarm bell echoes from the central church, shattering the village peace. The sentry on the watchtower hammers the warning gong to signal approaching magical beasts. Standing before the gathered villagers, alongside Christoffel Callisto, Edward urges everyone to remain calm. Grim faces turn to Edward as he explains the deadly threat to Trame, watched closely by Sonia, Luca, and Arcia. Edward pumps his fist, reassuring the crowd that Christoffel Callisto stands with them as an elite battle mage. Raising his sword arm high, Edward vows to protect their shared home with everything he has. Blazing mana ignites along the blade held by Edward, expanding into a massive fiery edge before the crowd. The priest and Sister Ulrika stand ready to heal anyone who falls in battle as the crowd cheers for Edward and Christoffel Callisto. Edward hurries over with open arms, grinning as Arcia giggles and praises his glowing sword. Staring at the mana-infused blade, Christoffel Callisto demands its origin, and Edward reveals that Alia forged it. Shocked to the core, Christoffel Callisto refuses to believe a legendary high elf personally crafted the weapon. Edward beams with pride, explaining that the enchanted sword lets even a standard warrior clash against spellcasters. Christoffel Callisto points sharply at the blade, snapping that high elves never bestow weapons on humans, even as Edward insists. Stepping close, Christoffel Callisto sternly forbids Edward from ever brandishing that sword before outsiders. When Christoffel Callisto summons Edward and Luca to the front lines, Sonia gasps in alarm. Sonia frantically questions, sending Luca, and little Arcia trembles, calling Christoffel Callisto frightening. Offering full protection, Christoffel Callisto promises Sonia that the boy will only produce extra arrows from the rear. Luca smiles up at Sonia holding Arcia, declaring his determination to protect his family and the village. His resolve eases the panic in Sonia, bringing a tender smile back to the face of Arcia. After Luca promises to stay out of danger, Edward exchanges a knowing look with Christoffel Callisto. Behind the spiked wooden barricades, armed defenders watch as Luca drops a fresh bundle of conjured arrows. Jonathan inspects the fletching with a furrowed brow, prompting Luca to ask what is wrong. Lifting a corded bundle, Jonathan admits the supply is impressive, but still insufficient for a protracted siege. Raising a reassuring finger, Luca tells Jonathan not to worry, because this batch is only the first wave. Off he dashes to materialize more quivers for the remaining archers, leaving Jonathan in stunned disbelief. Jonathan yells to ask if his mana reserves will hold, oblivious that Luca draws ambient energy straight from nature. Roger reports to Edward and Christophel Callisto, receiving praise for his scouting party before detailing the enemy movements. The scout explains that the monsters have halted at the tree line, joined by an unexpected second pack. Side by side, rival apex predators gather without conflict, baffling Edward, since these species normally kill for territory. Edward consults Christophel Callisto, who grimly suspects an unseen puppeteer is directing the beasts. High on a wooded ridge, a dark silhouette raises its arm, orchestrating the horde below. The sentry atop the watchtower shouts in terror as the monstrous swarm begins its charge. Acknowledging the alarm, Christophel Callisto orders Edward and Roger to advance to the front line. Roger takes command of the village bowmen, lining them up to meet the incoming horde. Edward commands the archers to unleash relentless volleys, promising that he and Christophel Callisto will strike down any survivors. Ferocious beasts surge forward across the clearing as Roger and his archers draw their bowstrings taut. Edward thrusts his sword forward and roars the order to fire, unleashing a lethal storm of arrows onto the charge. Shafts pierce deep into hide and bone, yet the frenzied monsters push on under the dark silhouette's command. Perched on the outcrop, the unspotted entity watches the bloodbath unfold in cold detachment. Mocking the villagers as brainless commoners, the creature laughs, seeing Christophel Callisto and Edward hold their ground. Edward narrows his gaze toward the empty ridge, causing Christophel Callisto to ask what caught his attention. Scanning the swaying trees, Edward brushes off the unease and tells Christophel Callisto it was nothing. A pool of black liquid slithers through the grass, revealing the true form of the vanished monster. Creeping through the undergrowth and startling a field mouse, the viscous ooze locks its gaze onto a figure atop a hill. Luca stands on the rise with clenched fists, praying for Edward and Christophel Callisto as the entity tracks him. Seeing that Luca looks straight ahead without noticing it, the creature sneers and crawls toward the village settlement. The dark ooze slips unnoticed past distracted villagers, freezing the moment something catches its eye. Outside the home of Luca, Sonia stands in the doorway holding Arcia, with Liniel beside them. Trembling with fear, the niece asks Sonia if they will be safe, and Sonia assures her they are strong enough to endure, winning a nod from little Arcia. Dark ooze stretches upward, splitting open into a jagged mouth as the Viscount's son sneers that he recognizes Sonia. Glaring at Sonia, the monster snarls that she is the wretched woman who destroyed his entire noble life. Horrified, Sonia and the girls shrink back in terror as the black slime rasps that it will never forgive her. Shaping itself into a grotesque humanoid form, the creature vows to torment Sonia until nothing remains of her. A grotesque slimy tongue lashes out towards Sonia, driving the terrified niece to scream and Arcia to hide her face in horror. Across the village, Luca jerks his head around, struck by an overwhelming dread. Breaking into a swift stride toward home, he knows Sonia and Arcia are in mortal peril. Agony tears through his chest, dropping him to his knees with a violent cough right before the eyes of Christophel Callisto and Edward. Panic grips Edward as he shouts his son's name, alongside Christophel Callisto demanding to know what struck the boy down. Flushing red from the torment, Luca fights to summon every scrap of strength to reach Sonia and Arcia before it is too late. An alien force seizes control of Luca's body, prompting Edward to rush to his writhing son and press Christophel Callisto for answers. Grimacing as the grim truth hits him, Christophel Callisto reveals that contract magic is unnaturally binding Luca, leaving Edward horrified. With eyes closed tight, Luca channels his immense mana inward to pinpoint the foreign curse strangling his soul. Surging waves of magical energy erupt within him, blinding his vision with brilliant flashes of light. An echoing voice warns him to brace himself, and Luca snaps his eyes open, fully tuned to every mana pulse across the village. Vaulting up from the dirt, Luca bolts at blinding speed as Edward and Christophel Callisto shout after his fading silhouette. Shocked by his son's impossible speed, Edward questions Christophel Callisto, who immediately orders Edward to chase after the boy. Sonic shockwaves ripple through the air as Luca blazes forward in an explosive sprint. Carrying his blade, Aiden shouts in bewilderment, only to be knocked flat onto the dirt as Luca blows past him like a gale. The path to his home opens up, revealing the black slime cornering Sonia, Arcia, and his cousin outside the door. Fury flares through Luca at the sight of this monstrous abomination looming over the family he swore to protect. Dropping from the sky with a devastating kick, Luca slams his foot directly into the monster's face before their stunned eyes. Upon impact, the creature's head squishes and deforms, revealing to Luca that he is fighting a corrosive slime. Relief washes over the family as Sonia shouts his name and little Arcia cheers joyfully for her heroic big brother. Clutching its ruined face, the slime howls in rage, but Luca plants himself firmly between the beast and his family. Smoke rises from Luca's foot as the monster's acidic slime dissolves his shoe into nothingness. Rising with a sinister grin, the monster tries to scrutinize Luca's face, baffled by the boy's strange aura. With a furious screech, the slime lunges forward, forcing Luca to stay clear of direct physical contact. Tendrils of black liquid stretch out toward Luca, only for Edward to flash in and sever the limb in a single stroke. Sonia, Arcia, and the girls gasp in gratitude as Edward stands tall beside Luca to protect them. Writhing in agony, the slime recognizes Edward and spits vile curses, met by a lethal glare from the veteran captain. In front of Luca, Edward declares that the Viscount's son died long ago, but the monster shrieks that Edward alone will perish today. Absorbing Edward's words, Luca pieces together that this fiend mutated after death and that his father is truly Christophel Callisto's son. Edward raises his sword in fury, roaring that whether monster or noble heir, no creature will ever harm his family. Silencing Edward with a roar, the monster strikes at both men as Luca weaves creation magic with both hands to shield his father. Heavy clay dolls created by Luca latch onto the monster's thrashing limbs, sending the beast into absolute shock. Enraged, the creature thrashes against the earth golems, shrieking that filthy mud has no right to touch an aristocrat. Seizing the opening, Edward leaps forward with his great sword, reminding the fiend that nobility vanished the moment he became a monster. Multiple lethal slashes carve through the black slime, scattering corrosive droplets across the dirt as the clay dolls peel away. Delivering a decisive strike, Edward lops off the howling head of the beast under Sonia's fierce gaze. Over the severed head, Edward reflects that his contract brought him this precious family, then turns his gaze back toward Luca. Smiling warmly, Sonia and the girls rush over as little Arcia giggles that her father and brother are invincible heroes. Luca smiles softly, pondering his past life memories and cherishing the deep familial bond that protects him from the dark. Without warning, a chilling voice resonates inside Luca's mind, declaring his soul will be overwritten, turning his eyes pitch black. Raising a cold hand toward Sonia and Arcia, Luca conjures sharp stone projectiles in midair, freezing Edward in sheer terror. Horror grips Edward at the sight of stone shells aimed at his family, driving him to cry out in desperate confusion. Confusion turns to heartbreak on Arcia's face as she looks at Luca, met only by his dead, emotionless stare. Before the lethal volley fires, Luca's own clay dolls tackle him to the dirt, wrestling him down to break the spell. Edward watches in stunned disbelief as Luca's own loyal golems intervene to save the family from their master's possessed magic. Collapsed on the dirt, Luca gasps for breath and clenches his trembling fists, horrified by what he almost did. Tears stream down his face as clarity returns, realizing he nearly murdered Arcia right before a voice purrs that despair is delicious. The severed head speaks up, sensing Luca's immense power despite her scrambled memories. Blade raised, Edward confronts the monster, unsettled to hear a woman's voice babbling about lost memories from a past rebirth. She reveals the Viscount's son and the slime are gone, leaving only her, prompting Edward to demand what she did to Luca. Tasting the name Luca on her tongue, the severed head chuckles and devolves into twisted, guttural gibberish. With Luca pinned down by the clay dolls, she admits that despite her amnesia, a deep bond connects them. A splitting headache strikes Luca as the severed head shifts into a woman's form, savoring the flavor of his anguish. As Luca recoils in terror, a forgotten memory surfaces, standing outside his suburban home in Japan beside parked cars. Ribbon-wrapped boxes rested in his hands, bought as birthday gifts for his mother, father, and sister. Between the large box and the smaller packages lay a celebration, since all three of his family members shared the exact same birthday. Smiling at the sake set he bought for his father, Luca relives the joyful moments of his past life as Rue. Rue stepped through the front door with a cheerful shout, only to freeze at the sight of an unfamiliar guest in the living room. Across the table from his parents sat a dark-haired girl who smiled warmly, welcoming Rue home by name. Demanding what she was doing there, Rue frowned, but the girl merely giggled as his mother chatted about his high school days. The stranger claimed his parents told her everything about him, prompting his mother to laugh that he never changed. Her smile vanishing in an instant, the girl snapped an order to be quiet, and his mother's head slumped limply to the side. Gift boxes crashed to the floor as Rue cried out in panic, asking his parents what happened. Paralyzed in their chairs, both parents stared ahead with blank white eyes as Rue demanded what she had done. Shouting in a fury, Rue pressed for the truth. truth, but she casually assured him they were only unconscious. With a wicked grin resting on her chin, she advised Rue to ask about his sister Kiri instead. Lunging forward with a desperate scream, Rue demanded where Kiri was, met only by the girl's mocking smirk. Her outstretched finger pointed toward the sofa, directing his gaze to where his sister's legs lay sprawled across the floor. Finding Kiri collapsed cold on the rug, Rue dropped to his knees and desperately pleaded for her to wake up. From behind him, the girl raised her hand to paralyze his posture, explaining she put Kiri to sleep with magic. Completely unable to move a muscle, Rue demanded what magic she meant and why she was doing this. Licking her lips, she confessed she was a demon who fed on mortal emotions, especially pure love and fierce rage. In disbelief at absurd words like demons and magic, Rue protested. But she claimed to be the sole demon in this world. Draping an arm across his trembling shoulders, she leaned close and whispered that she had been reincarnated. In her original world, demons controlled mortal minds, with high elves standing as their sole natural predators. She asked if he knew what dark curse the demons engineered to counter those elven monsters. A noble high elf who loved humanity once had his soul twisted and broken by their vile curse. That corrupted figure slaughtered so many mortals that history came to fear him as the Demon King. Flocks of lesser demons gathered at his side, eager to feast on the agony spilling from his carnage. Instead, the Demon King slaughtered his demon followers like vermin, crushing them beneath his overwhelming might. Consuming the lingering power of her slaughtered kin, she managed to reincarnate, prompting Rue to ask why she targeted his family. A twisted grin crossed the demon's face as she declared to Rue that nothing in the universe tastes sweeter than absolute despair. Gazing toward his parents and Kiri, she explained that she sought the warmest household, for deeper love breeds darker despair. With a flick of her hand, she asked what could hurt more than dying by family hands, forcing Rue's limbs to move against his will. Savoring the thought of his broken soul, the demon made Rue wrap his hands around Kiri's throat and squeeze. In sheer horror at his own tightening fingers, Rue begged her to stop, but she laughed that the curse turns love directly into bloodlust. Shaking violently as his grip threatened his sister's life, Rue resisted as the demon commanded his soul to slaughter everyone he loved. Through sheer willpower, Rue shattered the compulsion enough to loosen his fingers, weeping over his precious sister. A scream ripped through the house as the demon turned her back, marveling at his incredible defiance. Astonished that a powerless mortal resisted her curse, she praised his struggle as something wonderfully sweet. Breaking free of her control, Rue charged forward and struck her with a desperate punch, yet her body did not budge. His fist remained planted against her chest, catching her off guard as she gasped, detecting the holy sword within him. Black liquid bled from the demon's eyes in utter shock as Rue struck, dumbfounded that a cornered mortal could unleash such power. Throwing her head back as cracks spread across her body, she recoiled that a needle-sized spark of the holy sword could ruin her vessel. As blood dripped onto the floor, she clutched Rue's tear-stained face, hissing that she refused to let him go so easily. Looking up from the crib, a newborn baby blinks as Sonia and Edward smile down warmly, welcoming their son. Luca tries to speak, but only clumsy baby babble escapes his lips as he struggles to grasp his situation. Sonia gently rocks him in her arms, and the truth clicks. He has been reborn as an infant. Chilling memories flash back, the demon girl clutching his face, refusing to die alone before her breath faded. Tears stream down his face as he shivers in Sonia's arms, realizing the fiend killed him as well. Faces of his past family flash across his mind. Sonia cradles Luca, asking why he weeps as Edward watches with concern. Urging her son to smile, Sonia laughs as Edward makes silly faces and funny noises to cheer him up. A gentle smile breaks across his face, yet a sinister voice echoes inside his skull about a warped soul, turning his eyes pitch black. Tiny palms strike Sonia's face as Edward asks in shock why the infant lashed out with such malicious fury. The demon girl's sneering visage surfaces, taunting that her curse would restore his memories upon awakening. That curse compels him to murder everyone he loves. Sonia asks if he is hungry, but Edward snaps his fingers to distract Luca. His eyes clear as floating droplets rise from Edward's hand, demonstrating the simple joy of water magic. Relieved, Sonia praises her husband, sparking wonder in Luca about the existence of magic in this world. Luca deduces that the demon girl's curse is magic itself, a sinister craft demons use to control minds. Back in the present, Edward draws his blade near the severed head, shouting for Luca to snap out of it as Sonia rushes in. Smirking with her tongue out, the demon girl's severed head asks if he finally recalls their intimate bond. Pinned to his knees, Luca grips his skull as clay dolls brace his back. Edward begs him to hold on over the demon's cackling. Whispering his past name, Rue, the demon savors his agony as as Luca glares back at the source of his torment. In his infancy, Luca lay in his crib with clenched fists, focusing his internal mana to purge the curse alone, expanding his senses across the sky and earth. Boundless mana merges with world spirits, tempting him to vanish forever. A vision reveals Edward battling Magsbury wolves, his hands torn and his sword drenched in blood. Scarred across the face and eye, Edward roars at the beasts, never to lay a finger on his family. Dark silhouettes advance toward Sonia as she clutches a weeping baby Arcia, begging the shadows to stay back. Foreseeing the deadly peril awaiting his sister Arcia and mother Sonia, Luca resolves that he must survive to save them. Restful in his crib, Luca observes the vast currents of mana coursing through his infant veins. Standing beside the crib, Edward urgently calls Luca's name as the priest watches from behind. Tense and resolute, Edward and Sonia channel their combined mana into their child's fragile body. Clasping Luca's hand, Edward casts contract magic, driving binding power deep into his soul to suppress the curse. Both parents hold his hands to fight poison with poison, knowing the demonic parasite feeds directly on his soul. Edward shuts his eyes in despair as contract magic fails to purge the curse, consuming his son's spirit. Luca makes his choice. He will sacrifice his own memories and ego to supercharge the binding contract magic. Unable to erase the demon's death curse, he weaves contract magic directly into the malediction itself. The pact seals his heart against outsiders, leaving Sonia worried when little Luca never smiles. Striking the training dummy, Luca dedicates every spell to defending his kin as Edward advises moderation. Hands over his chest, Luca accepts that if the curse activates, the contract will force him to die in isolation. Swirling mana erupts around him as the demonic curse and contract magic fuse into a single seal. Willing to let his former self fade, Luca entrusts the protection of Sonia, Edward, and Arcia to his new life. Joy fills the room as Edward cradles his son beside a beaming Sonia, with the priest smiling warmly behind them. Tears of pure happiness fall as Sonia kisses little Luca on the cheek, marking the true dawn of his rebirth. Facing the severed head under anxious gazes, Luca declares he remembers everything about her curse, which she gleefully confirms. With a faint smirk, the demon girl admits her own memories are lost, yet senses her fragment throbbing inside Luca. As she relishes his torment, an enraged Edward draws back his sword, roaring at the monster for torturing his son. Edward hurls his steel blade with deadly precision, impaling the demon's severed head straight through the skull. Rushing to his side, Edward calls out as Sonia checks on Luca alongside a clay doll and both frightened girls. Heavy breaths escape Luca's lips until the corruption warps his soul anew, snapping his eyes open pitch black. Clay dolls restrain him once more as Luca shouts for his family to stay back before his bloodlust takes over. Sonia breaks down in tears, leaving Edward paralyzed with dread as Liniel weeps beside them. Clenching her tiny fists in tears, Arcia cries out that her big brother is in agony. Deep in his soul, Luca apologizes to Arcia for causing her tears, reaffirming his vow to keep her safe. Dark thoughts tempt Luca to end his own life just to spare his beloved family from slaughter. Memories of slaying the demon girl surge back, urging Luca to pour every drop of his mana into shaping a radiant holy sword. Driving that shining blade through his own chest is the only way to purge the foul curse, even if it claims his life. Luca grits his teeth against the searing agony, resolved that dying here will spare everyone he loves from harm. Gazing at his terrified family, he offers them a silent prayer of gratitude for all the warmth and love they gave him. Tears stream down Arcia's face as she stands before him, pleading with her brother not to take his own life. Before Luca can whisper his final farewell, Arcia screams with all her might, desperate to stop him. Her frantic cries echo right through Luca's skull, jarring his fading consciousness with pure, noisy desperation. Past memories of scolding Arcia not to wake him during naps flash by, and she weeps openly, realizing he may never wake again. An easygoing voice calls out through the panic, urging Luca to hold on, because Alia has arrived to lend a hand. Hearing the high elf call for him to wait, Luca snaps his eyes open in shock, straining to pinpoint the speaker. Thick roots burst from the earth to cradle Luca aloft, making Edward stare in utter disbelief at the stray tendrils of the sacred tree of Syra. A teasing voice chimes in from the side, warning Luca that dying now would spoil all the fun and drawing startled glances from the family. Alia strolls over with a lazy wink and a yawn, admitting he sensed dark power inside Luca but never expected an actual demonic curse. Suspended by the roots, Luca insists he must die to end the curse, yet Alia points right at him and refuses to let a good friend throw his life away. Flashing a confident grin, Alia points right back at Luca and assures him that this curse can be shattered, leaving the boy stunned. Stepping closer to Luca, Alia declares that that they possess every single condition required to destroy the curse as the family watches intently. Alia gestures to himself as a high elf and points to the gifted mana users in Luca's family, catching everyone completely off guard. Gently clasping little Arcia's hands, Alia reveals that she alone possesses the power to form a contract with the sacred tree of Syra. With a warm smile, Alia assures Arcia that her unique strength can purge Luca's curse, leaving the toddler blinking in shock. Edward demands an explanation about this contract, prompting Alia to note how often Arcia clings to the colossal sacred tree of Syra. Clutching her plush bunny, Arcia has unconsciously drawn upon the sacred tree of Syra all this time to protect herself. Her instinctive shield protected her beloved brother as well, making Luca realize she senses his mana through the sacred tree of Syra. Alia nods with a grin, confirming that such a bond normally requires high elves, the rightful guardians of the sacred tree of Syra. Edward and Sonia stare in shock as Alia marvels that a child blessed with such immense authority was born in this remote village. Holding Arcia's tiny hands, Alia declares her the true guardian of the sacred tree of Syra, leaving the toddler wide-eyed with wonder. The high elf explains that the sacred tree of Syra in the magic forest has lacked a keeper for ages, offering to help Arcia forge a pact. When Edward protests that Arcia is only 2 years old, Alia shushes him, insisting the final decision rests solely with the girl. Weighing the heavy choice, Arcia looks up at Luca, trapped in the roots, watching her brother suffer in agonizing pain. Breaking into loud, frantic sobs, Arcia hardens her resolve to save Luca at any cost.